Welcome back to another episode of the Performance Podcast series. We are honored to be joined today by a remarkable 5 Moments of Need designer, Donna Audritsh, who today will share with us the power of what's called a rapid workflow analysis, or RWA, which is truly a transformational approach in the enable methodology that helps us go from a training focus to a performance. Donna, so glad you're here. We hope you enjoy and give a listen. We are honored that you joined us again. Hope you're off to a great start to your new year. We could not think of a better topic to start with, or person, to be honest, about this power of what's to follow this year for many that are journeying into workflow learning, 5 Moments Need, because a huge pivot for those that have done it and the power we see in it is this cool thing called an RWA, rapid workflow analysis. So they're going to start the year with what is often the pivotal start of any performance-focused job or work that your L&D team would do. And we're honored to be joined yet again by one of the rock stars in RWA and 5 Moments. Donna, it's good to have you here, friend. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So excited. And she's in the midst of a bunch of them right now.
Yes.
and I'm watching her masterfully do this. So friends listening, you could not have a better sage to be walking us through this, particularly with what's in front of her right now. So what's interesting about this, Donna, let's kind of back up a little bit, because although this is RWA focused and we will go deep there, it is important, I think, for everyone that we are kind of pulling this out of what really is a methodology, right, that we call enable. So before we dive deep into it, can you kind of, again, this isn't about that per se, but can you kind of level set us a bit on methodology to give us the roadmap of where we are in the mall, kind of thing?
Okay. So the enable methodology, the RWA is inside of the A part of the acronym enable. And so first we engage to align, and then we analyze to design, we build, we leverage, and we evaluate. And so it's kind of the second process in our enable methodology. And I would say that the primary way that the enable methodology has changed the way I think about this work is in the way it gives us tools to partner with the organizations that we're working for, whether we are outside consultants or whether we're inside of an L&D team working for a large organization. It allows us to partner with them instead of focusing on our own L&D goals. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I would also say that we often talk about this RWA, and it's a really fun, exciting thing for me to talk about, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the enable, the EN part that comes before the analyze to design, is also critical, that you have these conversations where you align with your stakeholders, and you engage with them in a way that sets you up as a partner that cares about what's important to them and what their goals are. And in that process, if you together align on the need for a 5 Moments of Need solution, because it's not always the answer to everything, then you're ready to move forward into analyze to design, which is where you're going to map the workflow and conduct the rapid workflow analysis.
Brilliant. And so a key component, as you mentioned, and again, as I share your passion about this, because it was transformational for me in my journey from training to performance as an ID myself years ago. Let's go there. So RWA, we use the acronym, or we say it out loud, rapid workflow analysis. As an ID out there listening, I'm like, well, I've heard some of those words before, maybe not the rapid thing, but can you define it? Can you give me what it is? Before you go deeper, can we start there?
So the definition of a rapid workflow analysis is it's a systematic process to identify what someone needs to do and to know in order to be able to do their job successfully. So it focuses on that critical moment among the 5 moments of apply, the moment where the rubber meets the road, where someone is trying to do what they learned in training, and it's often where traditional training falls apart. So this process is at its heart, it's a facilitation, it's a facilitated discussion among subject matter experts, business matter experts, people who do the work, and it allows us to map the workflow that we are trying to analyze in our rapid workflow analysis.
Perfect. So again, and as we're socializing it to those who are just, we talk about the nature of encoding and such, right? And adults, if I'm an ID, I'm trying to hang this on stuff I know. And I might be thinking, oh, no, wait, I've done task analysis. I heard her say task. I heard her say analysis and task in there somewhere. So help me differentiate from the old, if you will, I hate using that word, maybe training mindset of analysis is, as far as Addie, for instance, was concerned,
All
to what we're
right.
talking about now?
So I think the first thing, it's important that we're not throwing away a task analysis. Task analysis has its place, and we still do task analysis. Task analysis involves like really nitty-gritty observing and documenting and analyzing the detailed steps that people do when they're performing a task. When we use our methodology, the task analysis of the individual tasks comes later. The rapid workflow analysis is a step before that. It's a broader lens, and it allows us to identify which tasks should we be diving into to get those details in the first place, and how do those tasks relate to each other in terms of a workflow that makes sense to the people that do the work. So that's the first thing about, we're not throwing away the task analysis. So some of the other important differences between a traditional task analysis and a rapid workflow analysis is the way that we gather what we call supporting knowledge, or the concepts, the things that people need to understand, and we gather them separately from
Mm,
the steps and the details in the tasks that people do. And that becomes really important when we use our performance pyramid to layer the content that we gather. So we separate out what people need to know from what they need to do. We don't throw away either one of them, but we gather them separately. And then one of the biggest strengths of a rapid workflow analysis is that we do a critical impact of failure analysis to help distinguish what are the critical tasks from the tasks that employees can fail at safely. And so by looking across our tasks at what are the consequences to the organization if someone fails to do this task properly or fails to do it at all, that's never part of a traditional task analysis.
mm,
And we know that one of the best ways for people to retain what they learn is to learn it by doing. So we want to figure out which tasks can they actually learn by doing without a lot of support, and then we can better budget for and use our resources, which are limited, to focus our traditional training on those tasks that are critical, where it's not safe for them to fail, where there could be a huge implication to the organization if they didn't do it correctly. So I think those are the main differences that I
yeah.
see.
When we do a task analysis in the old days, right, we already have the cart ahead of the horse that we're making training.
Mm.
It's a course. Everyone sitting in the room assumes everything's in it and will be taught. And you're right, that critical skills pivot really takes it to the 5 moments and helps with the digital coach and stuff. So, for lack of a better word, how does this flow? Like let's talk. Yeah, I watched you masterfully guide people through this. So let's take it to that next level of peeling the onion back.
Okay.
Talk me through how it plays out, or if you will, flows.
So if you've watched me, you know that it doesn't often look like a flow, or oftentimes it does not look like a flow. Sometimes it looks like a bit of a mess. But it's a facilitated discussion among the people that you have brought together to talk about it. And the reason that it can get messy, one primary reason, is that you're trying to facilitate a mindset shift, which I think we've talked about in some other
Hmm.
podcasts. We've talked about this mindset shift. It's a different way of thinking about learning and about the workflow and about the tasks and separating out the knowledge. All of that is a mindset shift for people. And so, especially in the beginning, it can be a little bit rocky. But basically, these are the primary steps that we do. And it sounds very simple when you put it on a slide like this. But first, we make sure everybody understands the methodology and the terminology that we're using, because we do use words a little bit differently than people might be thinking. So once we get through that, then we align on the scope of the analysis that we're going to do. And that's really critical to keeping everybody on the same page.
Mm.
Then we identify tasks. What do people within that scope do in order to perform the objective that we're trying to map? Then we organize those tasks into what we call processes in order to create a visual, intuitive workflow that makes sense to the people that are doing the job. Then we identify supporting knowledge, or the topic, the concepts that people need to know in order to perform those tasks. We identify the resources that people use, the things they refer to while they're performing a task. And then we conduct, as I said, for the critical impact of failure analysis. So it looks like 6 steps on a slide, and it sounds like it's going to be very easy. And it's not quite that easy, but I think it's really important that you really about the journey and that you allow the process to unfold because so much of the value that comes out of it is in the facilitated discussion. And
Hmm.
if you're too focused on where what you're trying to come out, you're trying to check these 6 things on your slide, right? You can like really shortchange the process, and then the organization doesn't get the benefit of the rapid workflow analysis. It usually takes a few days. And it's kind of interesting to me because we call it rapid. And then people say, a few days? I don't have a few days. Like, that's way too long. But if you look at it in the context of what we come out with in a few days,
Right.
it's truly amazing.
It is
Um,
amazing.
so if we come out at the end, we have intuitive visual workflows that make sense to the people who do the work, that they can look at and say, yeah, that's my job. That's what I do. That encompasses everything they need to do and everything they need to know in a clearly mapped way that allows them to do the job that we set up in our scope statement. So we have that all by itself is amazing. We've also, in that, established a structure for if the organization wants to build a performance support system, there's our structure is already there by laying that
Yep.
out. And we've also mapped out our training priorities, if nothing else, with our critical impact of failure analysis. So now we know like these are the things that need to be trained on, and these are the things that we can put in performance support. So to me, to accomplish that in 3 days
Remarkable.
is just like it's really amazing, I think.
And Donna, watching you do it and thinking back to when I did the other, I could probably do a task analysis in like a half a day. Get everybody in a room, cover a whiteboard. And I never got close to what you just described. Took me days, weeks after, and I never got the deliverables you just spelled out in that short of a what may feel like long time.
Hmm.
I mean, it's really remarkable. And following those 6 steps took a while for me. And again, watching you do it because it kind of cleans itself up as it goes.
Yes.
It
Yeah,
kind of
it
iterates.
gradually, it's really, really messy in the beginning. And then there's a couple of other places where it gets a little hairy. But ultimately, it all like filters. I don't know, it's sort of like magic.
Well, when Khan first did, I vividly remember my first one. And I remember being super stressed in the beginning couple steps you
Hmm.
described because I'm like,
Yeah.
where is this going? This is like,
Hmm.
how are we going to ever get our arms around it? And Khan's like, watch, watch. And
Hmm.
as he went through those things, we kind of revisited and cleaned up and
Hmm.
revisited and cleaned up. And
Hmm.
then all of a sudden, 2.5 or whatever days later, we had this really remarkable thing.
And the people in the room also they're
Yes.
learning as they're going because it's all new to them. So it's hard.
Yep.
But that comes back to like they're learning it by doing it, which is the way that works the best, right? And so they get better and better at it
They really
the
do.
further into it they go and the more they do. Hmm.
And isn't it amazing how little they know about their work?
Yes.
Or I mean, I don't mean
Yes.
that to sound wrong because they know
Yeah,
their
no,
work.
that's true. That's true. They don't
Isn't it
think of it the
something?
same way. Yes.
And I think that's part of the buy-in as I see the days play out, as they see the mosaic the pieces lying around coming into
Hmm.
something.
Hmm.
They get jazzed about that. They start
Hmm.
being like, "Oh my gosh, this is like." I've had people say, "This is the first time I've been here 20 years. This is the first time I've ever seen what I do."
Hmm.
Like, and
Yes. I've
everyone in
heard
the
that
room's
too.
right, and everyone in
Yeah.
the room's
Hmm.
nodding, going, "Yep, yeah, yeah."
Hmm. Yeah,
That
that's
is
true.
it's amazing. So, best practices, key
Okay.
strategies.
Okay.
So again, watching you do it so well, and I know that so much of this is just innate for you, frankly, and how good you are at this. What are some key things that make this what it is for you?
So I think the key things all kind of can get bucketed into something called facilitation skills because
Hmm.
it's really not about instructing them. There's a little bit of instruction up front, but it's really about allowing them to come to their own conclusions, to
Hmm.
talk amongst themselves, and to
Hmm.
learn by doing. And it can be that's it can be a little hard sometimes, but so I would say under that, maybe this one isn't quite about facilitation, although I guess it's facilitating the early discussions. The first thing I think is make sure you have the right people in the room. that you need the people that do the work. You might have subject matter experts, you might have business matter experts. You might have some L&D people in the room because they want to be there. You maybe have some managers because they want to see what their people are doing, but it's really critical that you have the people who actually do the work you're mapping in the room. So that's number one. Then the second thing I think is listen more than you talk. Once you've done your little educational piece and you've explained everything, you're going to have to explain it again, a few times as you go through. But like after the first hour at most, you're mostly listening to the people talk about their works, and you have to learn to listen for the tasks that are buried in the things that they're saying to each other
Mm,
because they don't always see
mm.
them that way. Have to help them separate out concepts from tasks, help them separate out what's too detailed without making them feel bad about how detailed their knowledge is.
Right.
And so you want to facilitate them rather than direct them. And that facilitation includes being comfortable if they disagree, because that happens too, is that,
Hmm.
sometimes it breaks out into an argument. Like, that's not how we should do it. That's not how I do it.
Yep.
That's not what's important, right? And so allowing that to happen,
Hmm.
it's not your responsibility. I'm always coming in from outside, as an outside consultant anyway, so
Sure.
like surely that how they're relating to each other is definitely not my responsibility. But you don't want to rush them to conclusions. You want to allow them to build some consensus. And so sometimes people, I've noticed, are thinking out loud. And so it might take a long
Yeah.
time for them to get to the point, and sometimes where they're going way before they do, and where it needs to go, but it helps if you allow them to get there on their own. So where you do need to step in, I think, is to keep them focused. So you have to keep your eye on the scope statement. That's why we have a
Yeah.
scope statement, to keep the guardrails up. And you allow them to talk amongst themselves without rushing them, but you sometimes have to pull them out of the rabbit holes. If they're going too far into the weeds, you don't want to let them do that. And you need to like reassure them that all that detail down the rabbit hole, we're going to get there. We're going to get there later, but let's like table that for now and we'll come
Mm.
back to it later. And sometimes they're even having conversations amongst themselves that I find myself getting a little impatient when like they kind of take it like on a sidebar of like something that they're doing in their work, and there's no task coming out of it, but they're kind of like, that's a critical part of this process, is
Hmm.
allowing them to share how people who work in different parts of the organization, for example, look at their work. It helps them to understand each other better and come up with the tasks better. So we want to ask them if there's something that needs to be clarified. Definitely like ask questions. If they're using something that's really jargony and it doesn't make sense to you, like it has to make sense to you. If they build a workflow that doesn't look intuitive to you, something's wrong there. Like, obviously you
Right.
need to understand it better, because in the end, the workflow is intuitive to the person who does it. But in my experience, they almost always make perfect sense to an outsider, even if somebody doesn't know what that job is. So you ask a lot of questions to get them to talk amongst themselves, I think
Mm.
but other than that, like the other kinds of challenges and questions like don't belong in the RWA.
That last part is so insightful, Donna, because I was always amazed that Con Gofferson could do a task analysis on pretty much anything. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, how do you walk into a hospital? You're not a doctor
Mm-hmm.
and do an RWA on, because the old days I came from, the company I worked for originally, when I was in ID and the whole deal, we were siloed into our expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I did Excel, it was IT. I did office products. Someone else did networking. Someone else did, because the burden of some of the knowledge was on the ID
Mm-hmm.
in some cases. But you just said you walk into these things and you don't know the job. It's not what you do,
Mm-hmm.
but you guide them every time around to this remarkable awareness and the workflow. And part of not knowing is actually powerful.
Yes, because they're not looking to you for direction. You don't know the answers. And even I mean, I've done similar RWAs for similar organizations, even similar roles. Their flow is each organization's
Right.
workflow, it looks different because they don't do it the same way. They don't look at their
Right.
work the same way. So you could be an expert on some particular job or technology, but you can't go in there and say, "Here, I build a workflow for the person who does X in the hospital." Like the next hospital might do it differently. So,
Yeah. It's such a testament to the methodology because the irony of this is we used to look for I sold e-learning and I wrote and sold e-learning, and we looked for standard stuff. We sold it by
Hmm.
libraries,
Yeah.
sales training and, right. And leadership training. And to your point, the snowflake that is leadership in their company in the workflow flows very differently
Hmm.
than it might in another. Although the principle of listening,
Right.
you know, safety in a hospital is
Yeah.
in there somewhere. But because you get to that workflow, it makes this so much more powerful and drives applying.
Yeah. It
So
gives them a context. It gives them
it
their
does.
own context. Yeah.
And that's the trigger, right? That's what moves you from new and more to apply is that context and that map. So challenges, obstacles, what do you try to avoid or what do
So
you look for?
yeah, I've hit on a couple of them already. The wrong people in the room is a big challenge. If the only people in the room are from L&D, you're in trouble.
Mm,
You're not
mm,
going to get a workflow that makes sense to the people that do the job. Similarly, if you have an RWA that involves a particular technology and you only get the systems people in the room,
yep.
they have some good insight and they have some good information, but they don't understand how people use their technology. So they're the wrong people in the room. So what do you do with that? I mean, the best thing is to upfront make sure that your client or the organization, the part of the organization you're working with understands the importance of having the right people in the room so that they can get the product that they want from it.
Hmm.
And I would love to see L&D departments partnered so well within their organization that they are empowered to say, I'm not going to do
Yeah.
this RWA if you can't bring me, because frankly, if they can't bring you the right people, you can't do a good job and you're not going to give them a good product. So that's the first challenge that I see that happens sometimes. Once you're in there, one challenge is sometimes maybe somebody's a really strong personality and they overwhelm the other people in the room. And that comes back
Hmm.
to like basic facilitation tools, bringing in the quiet voices, the person who's shy. When you're doing it virtually, some people would rather write in the chat than to talk out loud. So, like, it's making sure that one voice is not overpowering the rest. And a third challenge that I think has come out more since we started doing these virtually because we break them up across a longer period of time is inconsistent
Yeah.
participation. So
Yeah.
people say, well, I can give you these two people on Monday and then I'll give you those two people on Wednesday. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
You need the same group in. So my answer to that, if they have too large of a group and you don't want that many people in the room, so one solution to that is to say, well, can we have some of these people do the RWA and some people do the review afterwards? Then you
Yeah.
allow those other voices to be heard without putting so many people in the room that you can't reach consensus. That's one way. If they suggest that people tag team in and out, again, I would like to see us all empowered to say, no, we cannot
Yeah.
do it that way. It's
Yeah.
really a mess if you try to do it that way. So that's a challenge. And then I think a very common challenge for a lot of different reasons is you're trying to map a workflow that either doesn't exist or it's changing. And I mean, things are changing all the time. We're in an era where things are always rapidly changing. So one of the most common ones you alluded to before is people don't really even know that's what their workflow looks like. And you come out and you're like, wow, I didn't know that's what it looked like. But as soon as they see it, they're like, yes, that's it. Like you know that you nailed it. So the fact that they don't know what it looks like or that they don't already have one doesn't mean there isn't one. You're
Right.
mapping what they're doing and you're creating it for them. So I think that's an important thing. There's sometimes a challenge when people disagree about how the work should be done. They do it different ways across different departments or across different geographical areas.
Hmm.
So some of that you can fix with scope upfront, making sure that you agree with the organization that we are going to map the global workflow and let the regional things, get added in later. Or we're going to map best practices, things like that. So, and some of it is just facilitation and helping them to stay at the task level because many of those disagreements about how they do things are way down in the details. They
Yep.
do the same task, they just have minor differences, and that doesn't matter at the RWA level. You acknowledge that, yes, and I heard this in the meeting this morning. Yes, we get that there's this group and that group, and they do these things slightly differently, but they're doing the same task. And then we
Yep.
can take care of those differences later when we're building things out, but we don't really care at the rapid workflow analysis stage. Another challenge in terms of the workflow is if, and this comes back again to getting the right people, is you often have a process expert who knows how the work should
Yeah.
be done, has no idea
Yeah.
how the work actually is done, and that's a problem. So, again, that comes back to getting the right people in the room. Or sometimes you have the right people in the room, but they all know that their processes are changing. Well, like,
Yeah.
next year we're doing this and next year we're doing that. And what about this reorganization and that
Mm.
consolidation? And so that is sometimes at the scope level, you need to work with the organization and you make a decision. One way you might look at it is you decide, are we going to map the way it is now or the way that we anticipate it being in the future? And I usually advocate mapping the way it is now because the future is unknown. It never goes
Yeah.
exactly the way you think it's going to go anyway. But if things are really changing right now, you might say, we're going to map the changes that we know are happening, say, in the next 3 months or the next 6 months or something. And then the rest of them we will leave for maintenance. If you
Mhm.
change things later, that's the beauty of this, is that you can make those changes later when they change. Those are the challenges that come to mind for me.
So you talk about opportunities. I love the way, it's just the way you think, Donna. So challenges versus opportunities. But what really resonates with you is what is a challenge is an opportunity. So what do
Yes.
you see those as being?
So those challenges of people coming in the room and disagreeing or not knowing, different people doing work a different way, the fact that they've never mapped their workflow, they don't really know what it looks like. I mean, that's absolutely an opportunity for an organization to come out with, and I've had organizations that stopped at that point and said, wow, like you said, we didn't know this is what our workflow looked like. And sometimes they'll say, we think we need to make some changes now that we see
Hmm.
how this is being done. And so
Hmm.
before we start building out performance support to support this workflow, we want to make some changes to make sure the workflow is the way that it would be more efficient or whatever. So
Yeah.
there are efficiencies in their workflow. You're also shifting the mindset of the people in the organization that you're working in,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and getting L&D to better think about a performance mindset. You're bringing the L&D people together with the people in the organization to work together to see how they can partner. You're allowing them that opportunity to adjust business practices that aren't working well.
Yep.
So you're also building relationships in the organization because you get people from maybe different departments or different areas of the globe coming together that didn't really understand. They sometimes they're like really frustrated with, like, I send it over there and what the heck happens to it, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
now they understand, like, oh, it's because there was some task in the middle that nobody was doing. And it improves their relationships, it improves their workflows and their business flows, and it allows them also to align on best practices. So like I've seen people that are working with the system, and the systems people will try to walk you through all the tabs, like this is how it
Hmm.
works.
Sure.
And
And then you, yeah.
and they'll say, well, if they need to do this, here's what they have to do. And the people that are actually doing the work say, well, that actually doesn't work that way. If we do it in this order, we don't have this information yet. And so it allows them to change their practices if they need to, change the system if they need to, and it allows them to align on what are the best practices that we want people to be using so that they're not all having to create their own little workarounds for the stuff that doesn't work.
It's funny. I remember being in one of these, and the SVP of sales was our sponsor, and he had the sales process he already defined, and he already taught them. As always, or typically happens, the workflow map we came out with was not that.
Right.
But the cool thing about it was, and this isn't always the case, but I think it speaks to really what you're talking about here, was that we didn't go with it though. He said, look, I get it. I do see what you guys are all doing, but we really can't do it that way. There's inefficiencies that I'm
Mm-hmm.
hearing and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
here's what I get. We're not going to go back to mine either because
Mm-hmm.
mine was really wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the one you're doing and get it to a better place. And so there was like another there's a dialogue, even though everyone agreed and said, yes, that's how we do it. There was a dialogue and there was another iteration
Mm-hmm.
that was really, really good. And the
And
manager
mm-hmm.
loved it and could buy into it. The sales reps got their voices heard and
Mm-hmm.
inefficiencies talked about. Again, that was one of the guys that told us after. He said, look, if you guys don't build anything for us, this was worth every penny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now you're moving those salespeople from where they are to closer
Yes,
to where you want them to be instead of imposing on them something that has nothing to do
exactly.
with where they are. Mm-hmm.
And he said I could never have gotten them there without this dialogue. And clearly what I was top downing on them was not. They
Right.
weren't following it. It was really, really remarkable. So
Mhm.
let's put a bow around this. We often talk to IDs in this, which a lot of where you went in the weeds, if you will, of this, absolutely spot on. Many of our listeners are learning leaders. They want to go here so badly. They hear the power of what you said. They're nodding their heads out there. If I'm a learning leader, why am I going here? What's my elevator pitch? Or really takes us to where we have to get.
Well, I think the learning leader, I think this comes back to what we talked about in the beginning about we want our work to be relevant and we want to be a partner with the organization that we're working for, whether we're inside that organization or we're external consultants. We want to be good partners and we want to be working toward the same goal. And
Mhm.
this methodology allows you, it enables you, if you don't mind the pun, to do that. Because, and so, we, like you said, we focused here like way down on kind of in the weeds in terms of the it's the IDs that you have working for you that are going to be conducting these rapid workflow analyses to make this happen. But when you come at it from this perspective and you have engaged with your stakeholders from a collaborative way of how can we actually support you in meeting your goals and understanding better what's important to you. And then it's sort of like a cycle that feeds back, because the more you engage with the people in the organization in rapid workflow analyses, the better you understand their work, and you've established these relationships that come out with things that are really valuable to them. And even if you don't build an entire solution based from a rapid workflow analysis, you understand their work so much better and you are able to see where their challenges are. And they don't always know exactly where their challenges are. They come to you,
Mhm.
they say, something's wrong, we need training.
Right.
Right. But where if you can kind of pinpoint this and say, well, you don't really need this massive training on this whole job role or this whole process. What you need is a job aid that supports people when they're doing this task, because that's where they're falling down. So I think it helps you to be a better partner to the
Mhm.
organization. And in my mind, when you are a better partner with the organization, to me, you're meeting more meaningful goals. The L&D goals, the old ones of how many people took a training and things like that, they're not very meaningful, but you know that you're actually adding value to the organization. And frankly, we joke sometimes about how many times do we have to update a course. That's job security. But to me, like real job meaningfulness and purpose and security has more to do with, did I contribute something that was of value to
Absolutely.
the organization? So,
I've heard 1,000 times from learning leaders, the classic, I want a seat at the table, this
mhm.
type of stuff. And the cliche answer, or the, I think, too general answer is, well, we have to learn business acumen. We have to talk to the business about their performance. I hope everyone listened to this heard the power in all that you said, because this is the formula to get there, in my opinion. This is the doing of it in the weeds. You emerge at the table. You put it perfectly down at the end. You are seen now as a business partner through an RWA. And
Mhm.
all that follows, at least I never could, as the L&D training group. So good. So good. Man, I tell you, you are a gift to this whole thing. We had to put Five Most Need Consultant in a dictionary, your picture would be there, because that's like who you are. Thanks, Donna, so much for
Thank
your
you.
insights, your sharing, and how good you are at this. Great stuff.
But
Thanks.
well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Bob.
Thanks. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Performance Matters podcast series. We hope you enjoy the information shared. Please give us feedback on how we're doing. Love to reach out to us at the 5momentsofneed.com site. That's 5, the number 5, momentsofneed.com. We also hope to see you this May at the 5 Moments of Need Summit that will be in Charlotte, North Carolina, May 13th and 14th. Again, hope it's information that's very helpful, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Be well.